there are a couple of things I want to go through now. But if you're okay, let's see what happens. I want to take a look at the Gorgias notice. And I want to work through that quickly, because when it's first presented, it's presented in a situation of entrapment. Because this trilemma, nothing exists. If it does exist, it cannot be known. If it can be known, it cannot be communicated. It's open to all kinds of interpretation. Okay? But what Lyotard does is to choose the interpretation that I would choose as well. Okay? The interpretation is not a moment of truth at all. It's even less than being pragmatic. And then he picks it up again, Lyotard does, and picks it up and links it up with Gertrude Stein. So I'm going to take a look at what he says about Gertrude Stein. Okay. And then read to you some passages from Gertrude Stein. Okay. Buttons. Okay. And then I want to go to the statement, I think it's about number 41 or so, but we'll figure that out later on. It's necessary to win, but not how to win. And move through some of those passages. And then make a huge leap to because we've read a lot of the guts of this thing, the first 3 hours, the sign of history. Because I think this is really crucial, I think. And he explains in greater detail here, I think, what might be done, okay, when confronted with a different. But let's get back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. What brings about, let me just add another layer to this, what brings about an event of the presentation of the unpresentable? Okay? Absence, presence. Okay? And one explanation is, you've heard this over and over again, ad nauseam, but I have to repeat it, is that when any person attempts, or finds oneself in this situation, or attempts, and most likely is an attempt of some kind or another for domination, to try to derive a descriptive from a prescriptive, okay, and actually turn that prescriptive into, absolutize it into a descriptive, okay, that looks like a prescriptive. And that's only one possibility, but to absolutize it, universalize it, okay, for a small group, for a small select group, and it's always going to be that, because prescriptions would be, all compossibility, which we would always go back to try to find our way again. Okay. It's less controlled by negation, negativity. Okay. If anything, to use a word that Wolfgang, I think last night, put on the word natality. Okay, constant birth, just excess, pleroma, ubert in the title. Pleroma is the title of a book that who wrote?
Van Hammaker.
Hammaker, yes. First name basis, just I understand. Don't get upset, okay? I'll wait till later, okay? Anyway, so keep that in mind as well. But, that doesn't mean, okay, let's have an event, and structure this by trying to universalize it. Descriptive, which is really descriptive. So let me look at the Gorgias. Let me get something up. 27, page 14. No.
14.
Page 14, yes, thank you. Okay, 14, yeah. And it's going to be, notice 27. The silence of the survivors, this is Auschwitz again, okay, does not necessarily testify in favor of the non-existence of gas chambers. it can just as well testify against the addressee's authority. This is the problem of reversibility. Reversibility is another one of those possibilities of moments of both poison and cure. Okay, and it requires a certain wisdom in sense of dosage. It can just as well testify against the addressee's authority. We are not answerable to Forrison. Against the authority of the witness, him or herself, we, the rescued, do not have the authority to speak about it. Finally, against language's abilities to signify gas chambers and inexpressible absurdity. If one wishes to establish the existence of gas chambers, the 4 silent negations must be withdrawn. There were no gas chambers. Were there? Yes, there were. But even if there were, that cannot be formulated, can it? Yes, it can. But even if it can be formulated, there is no one, at least, who has the authority to formulate it, and no one with the authority to hear it. It is not communicable, is it? Yes, it is.
So you can see how nothing exists and so on can be used, but it has to be rejected in those lines. But you see, notice the reading of nothing exists. It says, in the way it's used here, there is no evidence. And that's not necessarily how nothing exists needs to be and can be interpreted. It's capable of being. It's nothing that exists. That's a different thing.
So then we get this discussion here of Gorgias and the reference in terms of nihilism. Please let me remind you again that nihilism has at least 3 stages. Okay? And you have to bring in, Lyotard knows this well. Okay? There's a passive nihilism in which you don't know what to do. I mean, you are just really up the creek. Then there's an active nihilism where you begin to work with it, work through it. Okay? And this is what he's doing here. He's showing us how to work through that kind of nihilism. And then there is finally an accomplished nihilism. And that is what the young man experiences, which I was talking about earlier before dinner, okay? In the writing of the disaster. When he goes through those 3, all of a sudden he goes, oh my God. And he's just drained of all values. Totally passive. He's where in the fuck am I now? Everything that I have been told is not the case. Total disillusion. Then, he starts working active analysis. And then finally, when he gets on the other side, the realization of, boy, I haven't lost anything. I've gained all these possibilities. Are you following that? Let me give you a really cheap example. You are 15 years old, and you find the love of your life. And this is it. And you know, man, this is it. This is just absolutely perfect. And it doesn't end up that way. A stupid example, but it's one that young people live with. And finally, you do hear this, some adult says, oh, there are so many fish in the sea, that kind of thing. So we can start with that sort of ground level, anecdote, representative anecdote, and start looking for what I would refer to, and I've said over and over again in prayer, misrepresentative antidotes. Misrepresentative antidotes. What are the other ways of thinking about this? And the whole writing of the disaster is an attempt to create, not in sentences, not in paragraphs, not in academic life, but in a Nietzschean kind of writing. show refers to as fragments. Okay. Antidotes, all the way through. Antidotes. Until there's no reason to even need antidotes. Because one now is a vision that is so open and so free. And one lives from day to day. Please, I'm just throwing that out as an example, and it's a book that you need to go read, and there are other books similar to that to take. Look, another example, this is an important, I'm giving you important examples for me, and I know there are important examples for other people. Examples. It is ample enough to get you through, okay? Once you have discovered nothing. Okay? When you've been thrown out, X out. Okay? The example is negation in language. Is that it? Negation in language. Giorgio Gomez, seminar. I think it's negation in language. It's 8 or 9 days. It's not 7 days. Like just gaming, basically 7 days. So he adds more days to the week. And it's reworking a passage in I think it's negation in death.
Or death in language? Negation?
Death in language, that's it. Yeah, thank you. Death in language. And he's reworking this passage in Heidegger. He was a student of Heidegger in the, I think, Lyotard seminars in France. And he talks about it in The Ideal of Prose. 2 pages. Just remarkable. Anyway, and it's because it's filled with antidotes. Not representative anecdotes, but I would call them misrepresentative antidotes. And he begins to restructure the whole notion that life is built on death, on negation. And he takes the approach of the troubadours. And you might want to read that book to get some other sense of how does one get out of total disillusion. Okay. For Sartre, it is the great discovery of essence does not precede existence. Existence precedes essence, and one makes one's own world. Okay, that's sort of a comic book way of expressing it. Obviously, it's more complicated. But we have all this that we can make now. Okay? That doesn't mean that human beings are the measure of things. It doesn't mean that we can make the world as we want it. Okay? Remember Marx, 18th Brumaire. He was aware of it. Okay. I'm not going to go through this long discussion here because there's some better passages later, okay, on pages 14 and 15. But this is the discussion of a sort of realistic, sort of literal reading from the old notion, okay, about negation of Gorgias. Okay. And this is the standard sort of interpretation. Okay. But as we move on, okay, we go to so lost. Okay. Now let's jump to this point, because we're going to get back to Gorgias when we get Gertrude's time. Okay. To page 29. 29, please. Okay. So it's going to be number 40. Notice number 40. Why these encounters between phrases of heterogeneous regimen? Differens are born, you say. He's addressing himself here. It's self-reflexive thing, where someone will stand, all of a sudden pop in. It's a really wonderful rhetorical device to do, because if you know your audience, they're not going to understand this, and they're going to be raising certain objections. You know, there's always someone in the audience who pops up and says, well, you know, there's this, yeah, God damn it, sit down, I'm getting to that. You know? and then you have that kind of tension, which, so how do we deal with it productively? Okay. So one way is, I've done this. I can hear a reader right now say, in objecting, such and such. Yes, you're right. But this is what I would say in response to balance it out. Okay. This is what he's doing, that kind of thing right now. Why these encounters between phrases of heterogeneous regimen? Differends are born, you say, from these encounters. Can't these contacts be avoided? That's impossible. The attempt to avoid them would be a moment in perhaps a string of utopia. Excuse me. What's the word I'm looking for? We're using it wrong. Total negativity. Physics, what is it? It's the opposite of negentropy. Entropy. And then there's negentropy, where you negate it, denegate it. Okay? And then you have excess. That's impossible. Contact is necessary. First of all, it is necessary to link into a phrase that happens. It's necessary. You cannot not do this. Okay? And one way of linking into it is just walking away from it. Or it's silence. No matter what you do, you're going to be responding. To not respond is a response. Okay. We know this is sort of a standard topos. By it, here it says it, be it by silence, which is a phrase. There is no possibility of not linking onto it. Second, to link is necessary. How to link is contingent. It's not necessary. It falls within the logic of contingency. There are many ways of linking onto. I can come by your place. God, I love these examples. But some are pertinent and others inconsistent. I would say, but some are pertinent and others are impertinent. If you want to be a thinker, be impertinent. But not as a knee-jerk reaction. Make sure that you have something to say after you've been impertinent. That will speak to, if you want to be rhetorically effective, and get people to listen to you and want more, okay? It's easy to piss people off. I mean, I have made a career of it. Okay, so being impertinent is a good thing, okay, if you have something to follow up with. Eliminate the latter and you escape the differend. Let's agree on this, but how can you know that some are pertinent? By trying out many ways of linking, including the inconsistent ones. But there exist genres of discourse which fix rules of linkage. You know what I mean? My teachers told me this when I was in school. I can use because only in one way. It's cause and effect. And although and however, all of those connectives, those little Vaseline words, that allow us to smooth out the relations, the linkages of all of these words, smooth out the syntax, which fix rules of linkage, and it suffices to observe them to avoid differends. Genres of discourse determine states. They submit phrases from different regions to a single finality. The question, for example, the argument, the narration, the explanation are in forensic rhetoric the heterogeneous means of persuading. It does not follow that difference between phrases should be eliminated. Taking any one of these phrases, another genre of discourse can inscribe it into another finality. Genres of discourse do nothing more than shift the differend from the level of regiments to that of ends. But because of several linkages are possible, does not that necessarily imply that there is a differend between them? Yes, it does. Because only one of them can happen, be actualized at a time. But there's something not being said here, but it is said, okay? You can write
a new phrase. And you can write another new phrase and another new phrase by the simple principle of conjugation. Remember when you read Moby Dick, Pip, the cabin boy, falls overboard, goes way down to the bottom of the ocean, and comes all the way back up again, and the child, is crazy. And all that he can say is, I see, you see, he sees, she sees, it sees. We see, you see, they see. The verb to see, he's conjugating the verb to see. Why is that important? Because each person aboard the ship, at that moment in time, all of these adults, they had put up a golden, coin of some kind. And there's an image on it, and they're all interpreting it in their own one way, without varying any assumptions whatsoever. And what's being indirectly talked about is the white whale. What does it mean? Everyone's interpreting it differently. Unfortunately, the person in control, the captain at sea, Ahab, sees it as evil, and he's going to, because they took his leg, and he's going to get revenge. And they're all going to die, except one's got to live. And we find him at the very beginning of the novel, floating around in what? A casket. Floating around in a casket. As if he's been resurrected to tell the story. So, there's value in, there's this child speaking these truths in a kind of sense of craziness, conjugating the verb. They're very your assumptions. Don't get stuck with thinking that your inference is the truth. Okay. It has to be tested. Take it for a test drive. It is Have you read her book, The Test Drive? She has taught me so much. It is unbelievable. Every time I write something, I'm having to test it. So I wrote the first 2 chapters. And then there's an excursus in this book. It's coming out whenever. And there's a test for the whole book. Which allows me then to stop and say, I'll talk about Vitanza. Do you think that, and so I'm thinking, what are the objections people can raise? Do you think Vitanza has thought that, and here I am writing it, such and such, how would you respond to him? Okay. And towards the very end, I have them going out doing assignments, reading things, this and that, and coming back, and the last assignment is go ahead and write your own book about rape and sexual violence. Okay. It is so crucial to realize that you're an addressee and that you are with others who are addressees. And it creates a certain sense of humility, okay, as well. And perhaps at times false humility. We're fallen. 141, is that where we are? It is necessary to link, but the mode of linkage is never necessary. That, and let me repeat this again, it is so heretical. And, I did this thing at the board about male, female, that's cool, female, male, that's cool, Although the female shouldn't really be in charge, in a lot of people's minds, because, well, I'm not going to go into the reasons because we all know. Can you elect her at all? Elect her at all, this is going to be all this part. As if men don't have periods. I'm still coming off of the most difficult period in my life. And then there were all these other possibilities here. This whole idea of like female and female. No, can't do that. Male and male. No, for sure. Okay. So this is right in the paradigm of possibilities. But there's an attempt to control it. And then we talked about Leviticus, right? We didn't really talk about stasis theory enough, and I sort of sense that there may be some, you may need more clarity about that, so if we can save it till the last 45 minutes, is that okay? It is suitable or unsuitable. Is that, yeah, okay. I can come by your place. How is the dollar? Or it's a crisis of overcapitalization? Did you brush your teeth? Or help, help! For whom? Or either P or Q? If P, then not Q. Did you know? This goes back to where? Something he says in this book, but he said it earlier where?
Number 4.
Just gaming.
Oh, right.
Just gaming. Did you know that she had arrived? Or close the door. You were saying to close the door. These unsuitabilities are so many damages inflicted upon the first phrase by the second. Would you say that these damages become wrongs from the fact that the first phrase cannot link on with a view toward its validation? It is not even that. Validation is a genre of discourse, not a phrase regimen. No phrase is able to be validated from inside its own regimen. A descriptive is validated cognitively only by a recourse to the ostensive. Okay? And here is the case, something you can point to. Okay? A prescriptive is validated juridically or politically by a normative. It is a norm that, but the norm is subject to revision. Okay? Ethically by a feeling. You see, all of this reasoning is traced back to a feeling. You know, all this research has been done in terms of the cerebral cortex, where reason is. And all the research has been done on the guts. You know? Very, very interesting. This is the balance, where the shit goes through, you know. You don't want shit up here, you know.
But it runs all the same shit.
Yeah, but it's my shit, man. So. Someone said something to me once about, boy, that Victor is so full of shit, and then I had to give him that response. Of course, they laughed, and it, you know, defused the situation. And I went home and wrote through it, you know, and it was okay. It's like writing an email to somebody, tell them, you don't like it. But you don't send it. You don't send it, okay? Okay, now, where did I want to go after that? Oh, okay, to, here it is right here. To Gertrude Stein, 66, 67. Okay, actually, go to page 65. Are we okay? Are you getting upset yet? With me? With yourself? Are you still upset with Wolfgang? How can you be upset with Wolfgang? Every time he opens his mouth, it's an event.
Yeah.
God, you know. And it leaves you speechless. Well, not really, but, you know. The whole bit about the shit on the carpet. We won't go there, but we live with it. We have to live with it. And we have lived with it here, okay? It's a sad thing, but it's a good thing, too. I'm not going to explain what I'm talking about if you don't know. So, at 100, on page 65, the phrase that expresses the passage operator employs the conjunction and so forth, and so on. The term signals a simple, this is logic, okay? I was talking about therefore, and because, and but, and so on, okay? But, but what are we talking about? And now, addition, okay? What is referred to as, well, we'll get the word here. This term signals a simple addition, the apposition of one term with the other, nothing more. Arbach turns this into a characteristic of modern style, paratax, or parataxis, as opposed to hypotaxis. Did we talk about that earlier? Parataxis means, well, I think I was talking about Whitman. Everything is in the catalog rhetoric and equal in its value.
Vidi, vidi, vici.
Yeah. There you go. Nothing is hypotactical, that it is subordinate to, okay? Which would presents a dominant, okay? You're a subcategory of this category, which is what scholasticism is all about. Right? Parataxis or parataxis, as opposed to a classical syntax, conjoined by and, we're on page 66 now. Phrases or events follow each other, but their succession does not obey a categorical order. And it's these, because, if then, in order to, although. It's an escape from these. Okay. This sort of symbolic logic here. Okay. If he, then, and so on. Joined to the preceding one by and, a phrase arises out of nothingness to link up with it. Are there any two things you cannot put together, like we were talking about last time? Rape and love. Okay? There's a real dialectical. The resonance there is huge. I talked about that before. Okay? In terms of Joyce Carol's novel, right? Okay. A phrase arises out of nothingness to link up with it. Paratax thus connotes the abyss of not being. This is Gorgias. Not out of the abyss of being. Not out of the grund of being, G-R-U-N-D, the grounding of being, but out of the abgrund, the abyss, roughly translated, of not being. There is a passage that continues to haunt me. I may have mentioned it before too. In Deleuze's his dissertation. I'm sorry? Difference in
Difference repetition.
Oh,
Difference
yes.
repetition.
difference in repetition. It's toward the end, or in the middle of the book. Have I talked about this? He says the most dangerous thing, action or whatever, work is to dig up the ground and turn it over. Dig the ground. And he's talking about it. And basically what he says, and then something happens when you can happen when you do that. And what's happening is, as he's describing it, is that there is this humanoid coming up that's made of the ground, dirt, moist dirt, and so on. And it takes on, it looks like humanoid. It has a head, and then there are these two eyes here, which are there defined clearly as eyes, but they don't seem to be able to see. And it's, for me, it could very well be because I didn't know that was there, and I didn't read it on my own the first time. It was read by Derrida in Paris at that last seminar that Diane and I were invited to, and other particular people in EGS. And I was standing up in the back, I was downstairs in the basement, and he was sitting, and he lectured for 3 hours. I think there was a brief break. He was not in the best health, obviously, at that point. It was a few months later, and he died, but he was reading that with such his seminar was on Deleuze. Not on Deleuze and Guattari, but on Deleuze. And he talked about two texts, this book, okay, Difference in Repetition, and Thousand Plateau. I know, there's a lot of Guattari in there, but he was focusing on a particular section. It was writing really eloquently and presenting it in the seminar. So that may have had something to do with it. I don't know. Or it just could have been to eat, or the way I was greeted when I walked in, which I will not go into that. But it's a passage that you might want to take a look at. Turning the ground over. Have you ever done any digging before? It's interesting what you find, isn't it? For sure you're going to find worms and all kinds of other things. And
remember as a kid spending a lot of time with dirt. We just lived outside, the city limits, and the dirt, it's incredible spending so much time with dirt, looking at it and seeing what it was made of and stuff, made up of and stuff. Okay, thank you, Victor, for, your little story. Okay. Where did I stop here somewhere? Not being obedient. I'm sorry?
Phrases after Parataxis.
Yeah.
Parataxis thus connotes what? The abyss of not being yet, which opens between phrases. It stresses the surprise, okay, the kairotic moment, that something begins when what is said, and is the conjunction that most allows the constitutive discontinuity or oblivion. Notice this phrase, constitutive stasis word. And then discontinuity is, let's take the stasis word back, away. So, you can think of this loosely as see, and then you don't see. See, you don't see. Dot, for, dot. Or oblivion of time to threaten, while defying it through its equally constitutive continuity or retention. This is also what is signaled by at least one phrase. Instead of and assuring the same paratactic function, there can be a comma or nothing. The function of the comma is that of a caesura, it's a break. What's the difference between reading something smoothly and reading it in a jerky or stop and then start talking about something else and coming back and so on? I have performed that. What is the difference? There is, and then you go back and you read it later. So, and this is your sort of relationship with this set of words or logos. You experience certain things, or some people do. I'm not saying this would have a vision. The sea has been separated, and the burning bush is talking to you, and all that kind of crap. So. Okay, Gertrude's time. So, what he gives us here on page 67, okay, are some examples here. Yeah, just look at a few of them. A sentence is not emotional. A sentence is not emotional. A paragraph is. Okay. A paragraph such as silly. When it is there, it is out there. This is sentiment, not a sentence. Now that is something not to think, but to link. And so on. Okay. These are some of her examples. Let me read you a few more. And then he comments on this stuff. Colin gave me this. This is about Mildred's umbrella.
Could you repeat that?
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat what you just said?
This is about Mildred's umbrella. This is Gertrude's style. A cause and no curve. A cause and a loud enough. A cause and an extra loud clash and an extra wagon. A sign of extra. A sack, a small sack, and an established color and cunning. A slender gray, no ribbon. This means a loss, a great loss, a restitution. What the fuck is being said? Well, listen to it. Speak it again. Listen to her speak it. There are recordings of this. Okay. Here is from the very end of a book called Rooms. The care with which the rain is wrong, and the green is wrong, and the white is wrong. The care with which there is a chair and plenty of breathing. The care with which there is incredible justice and lightness. All this makes a magnificent asparagus, and also a handkerchief. A winning of all the blessings. A sample, not a sample, because there is no word. Red roses. A cool red rose and a pink cut pink. A collapse and a sold whole. A little less hot. A table.
A table means, does it not, my dear? It means a whole steadiness. Is it likely that a change? A table means more than a glass, even a looking glass is tall. A table means necessary places in a revision of a little thing. It means, it does mean that there has been a stand where it did take place, etc. There are two books that I would love to take into Writing 101. One of them is How to Read by Rhetoric. The other is, wait a minute. How to Write. How to Write. Yeah, Rhetoric, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one is How to Read, and that is by Pound. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
it's called the ABC of reading.
Yeah, right. Thank you, ABC Reading. That's for Pound, yes. Those two. And just, I can see these kids running home and telling mom and dad this nut of a professor who wants, look at these textbooks. And of course, Pound, the Nazis, and so on. And Gertrude,
They had institutionalized whole
her
power.
partner.
Can I say something funny? I have right here a rejection letter to Gertrude Stein. Dear Madam, I am only one, only one being, one at the same time, not two, not three, only one life to live, only 60 minutes in 1 hour, only one pair of eyes, only one brain, only one being only one, having only one pair of eyes, having only one time, having only one life. I cannot read your manuscript 3 or 4 times, not even one time. Only one look is enough. Hardly one copy will sell here, hardly one. Many thanks. I return the manuscript by registered post. Only one manuscript by one post. Sincerely yours.
You gotta love it. I mean,
That's awesome.
she must have just been roaring.
1912.
Or right back and said, well, it's not quite right here.
A little too flat.
Again, what the world needs, what it was, a sense of humor, which is what we read pretty much. Okay, page 68. This is what he has to say. Let's just look at 6. To save the phrase, extract it from the discourses in which it is subjugated and restrained by rules for linking, enveloped in their gang. What's gang? Seduced by their end. Let it be. The way Cage writes for sounds in sentences and paragraphs. Nothing is noisy, as in silence. 7. The outrage of selecting phrases from Gertrude Stein's text. I, in quotes, utilize them, make them serve an argument, a discourse that subjugates phrases, that fills the abysses. In my text, separates and unites them from afar. In Stein's text, a phrase is one time, an event. It happens. The anxiety that this will not start up again, that being will come to a halt, distends the paragraphs. 8. Feminine writing. Inscribe that this cannot be filled in from one sentence to the next. Would it be a genre? Okay. Try page 75, please. You might want to, at a later time, look at page 74 at the bottom, 3.1. Some observations, number 3. 3.1, okay. The discussion of dunamis, sometimes spelled D-Y, here it's spelled D-U, potency. Potentiality. I think I made a passing reference to adunamis, impotentiality. And the nothingness that's being talked about here is the nothingness not of potentiality, but of impotentiality. Okay. Potentiality is still under negation. Impotentiality throws off, is an act of demon. It expresses itself through denegation. Okay. It is, again, the ideal utopia is the unconscious mind. Which, of course, is totally impossible. You would have to change yourself completely. You'd have to be your unconscious mind. Conscious. Okay, so it's ideal because you just suffer. You just think everything's cool. Everything is equal to everything else. It's just Parataxis all the way through. No negation. Some talk about in 3.2 of Arigness by Heidegger. Arigness gives and gives itself while withholding itself, and as presentation and all kind of stuff. And then jump down to the bottom. What you wrote, now he's talking to himself, okay? Or you can imagine some other addressee addressing this addressee. About 6 or 7 lines from the bottom. But you wrote, you got it? Cool. In quotes, for there to be no phrase is impossible. That's just it. The feeling that the impossible is possible. Please embrace, you don't have to accept. I'm not saying you're going to throw it away in some Hegelian way later. The notion of feeling, that's just it. The feeling that the impossible is possible, that the necessary is contingent. Necessity, the rules of necessity, the doctrine of necessity, okay, is really a contingency. Agamben at the very end of his book on potentialities moves over to chromatically to modals and contingencies and opens up this whole new world for us, demonstrating how others have opened up a whole new world for us. Okay. Remember the problem that, according to Lyotard, that in Just Gaming, that Oedipus has is that he doesn't know, he's stuck with this Apollo text, and he doesn't know how to rewrite it. He can't create what variants of it to get out of it. Seek for the variant. When you get stuck like this, you hit a wall, like Wittgenstein supposedly did. Okay. Did I tell you the story about the colloquium that we had at where I am? The chair of the philosophy department appealed to the closing of that statement, about which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. He didn't like what we were saying because it didn't fit his framework. And he started screaming, "Shut up!" And the irony of all is just shut up. He said, "Just shut up." And I thought, God, this is an event. This is remarkable. And it's become legend. Okay. I mean, it was like 3 years ago or something, and so all the new students get to hear about it who are coming in, it's like wonderful. It's the time to speak. It's the time to speak. 5 minutes later, he got up and stormed out. A caricature of what a philosopher is, who's passed over to the dark side of domination. That's just it. The feeling that the impossible is possible, that the necessary is contingent, that linkage must be made, but that there won't be anything upon which to link. Wow, isn't that a fear? Doesn't someone out there in the world love me and want to spend their life or a night with me or something like that kind of stuff, right? The end, with nothing to grab onto. Hence, not just the contingency of the how of linking, but the vertigo of the last phrase. Absurd, of course. But the lightning flash takes place. It flashes and bursts out in the nothingness of the night of clouds or of the clear blue sky. In the right, I'm trying to weave or suture all of these, not that they're going to be tacked down, passages from other works, okay? A similar flash like that.
A difference in repetition. Again, right before he's talking about the homunculus, he's talking about...
Oh, you got the right word. That's right. Thank you.
You're welcome. He's talking about lightning against... the white lightning against the black sky, is exactly why we can't accept ground. That I mean,
The ground is fixed, you know.
right. But that the way the lightning puts into relief the black sky is not ground, it's all pure fluidity. That's as much as I.
Great, thanks. I'll go back to
It's a homunculus and not a golem.
Well, it could be. One could,
There's a difference.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
And one's Faust, one's ancient Jewish.
yes, exactly. They may be linked in some way, but
He might use the term golem.
Yeah, I mean, but you have different types of golems, but earth golems is pretty common.
when I was talking about putting together of the dirt and all, the humanoid, yeah, I thought of that. I didn't want to mention it, but thanks nonetheless, because it does complicate the issue. It raises the question. Are there other traditions and other religions, Eastern and so on? Oh my gosh!
Native American.
What about China? I'm sorry.
Native American.
Okay.
Something about earth people. Yeah.
What about all those Chinese statues that we discovered? Were they Tamar?
But those are sculptures from burial. The whole city.
But were they Tamar? Come alive. I don't
They don't
know.
have exactly the same kind of independence,
I
quasi-independence.
think that they're multiple reduces their individual
I think,
points
yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to a golem or a homunculus.
Yeah. Isn't there a
There's 10,000.
yeah?
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Isn't there a Murakami quote about how you write? And it's you put pieces of bone and stick and twigs and whatever you find in a pile in the corner of the room, and you keep doing it until it comes to life. It's kind of writing's enough.
So that's what my son is doing when he's throwing everything over the corner, dirty clothes and everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times can I remember my mother telling me? Okay, so that's what makes me impatient. And the whole thing was, hang the towel when you're finished. I just throw it on the floor. And then I remember, I guess I was like 23, 24. And it just dawned on me, you know, and what she said just came right back. I mean, how do you break these habits? How do you do something that's different? Okay. And I just picked it up and put it there very neatly, you know, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. You know?
It dries faster.
It's it's an event.
It was an event.
Yeah.
Exactly. I said, thanks, Mom. What came to my mind in the clear blue sky and so on is the young man in the writing of the disaster looks out the window up into the sky as well, and that's when he has this sense of this huge sense of space and possibilities. Okay, I think now I want to turn to, Reed, do you want to laugh?
Yeah, I'm just laughing at some stuff I tell my kids all the time.
They'll thank you for it later.
Maybe.
That's what you think. Not having a child.
The second time, the last time that we met, you know, a previous day, which was the second day that we met, I referred to this passage as having doubts about it. It seems so simple. But when I woke up this morning, or when I was in bed, and then woke up, I was thinking how to recoup that in my mind. Okay. And so that's what I would I'd like to take take back that statement. It could easily be what I'm going to read in a minute to explain what the hell I'm talking about, to remind you that. It is a model to work from, and a model for everyone to work from. Here we are, the sign of history. And earlier, this flashes back to, there's this feeling that there, when talking about aspects, there's this feeling nonetheless. When there is no evidence, there's this feeling. How does one trust one's feelings? 218, a phrase which links and which is to be linked is always a pagus. P-H-E-U-S. A border zone where genres of discourse enter into conflict over the mode of linking. Now this, you can just jot this down if you can, if you have a book. You might want to look, page 139, 141, I think we've looked at these, and also 192. Okay. Just giving you the references. And the sign all goes back, the title of this section, to page 42, page 56, 57. So a phrase which links and which is to be linked is always a pagus, a border zone where genres of discourse enter into conflict over the mode of linking. War and commerce. It's in the pagus that the pax, sometimes I say pox and everyone laughs, but I said it correctly. The pax, the peace, and the pact are made and unmade. The discus, the home, the heim is a zone in which the difference between genres of discourse is suspended. And internal peace is bought at the price of perpetual difference on the outskirts. There's an agreement. We're going to disagree, and there will be many moments of difference. But what we agree and disagree is to continue to work through these. Okay? And in many cases, we're not going to have a balanced amount of information to achieve some sort of equity here. So we're going to have to work really, really hard, okay, without criteria, and we're going to have to bear witness to the idioms. Let's see now how he says those things in a somewhat different language. This internal peace is made through narratives that accredit the community of proper names as they accredit themselves. The Volk shuts itself up in the Heim, and it identifies itself through narratives attached to names. Narratives that fail before the occurrence and before the difference born from the occurrence. Then this, Joyce, Schoenberg, Cezanne, Pagani, waging war among the genres of discourse. Another example I would give would be Ovid. It's usually Ovid versus Plato, Plato versus Ovid. I wanted to say something last night to suggest to Michael Ovid, with all of its complications. Proteus. The Book of Changes, which is what the Metamorphoses begins with, the Book of Changes. What philosophy traditionally has concerned itself with is the Book of Life. Not changes.
Stasis.
Stasis, yes. Fixed. And what rhetoric has had to deal with, from Aristotle on, is changes. So the two, there is a journal called Philosophy and Rhetoric at Penn State. When the journal was formed, a lot of people in philosophy never really quite understood it. Why would you want to? But God and Satan.
There's a possible interpretation etymological interpretation of the word communication, which is rarely used, and it's really co, muni, and cation, well, ation, which is communicate, could be. And muni means movement. So it's really movement with the other.
With the other. It's a co-movement.
It's muni, muni. In Berlin, if I'm not wrong, in San Francisco, right? In some place, the transportation is called the muni.
The what?
The muni, whatever. Because muni is movement. So when you look at communication in that way,
It's co-movement.
It's co-movement.
Mhm.
It's movement with the other, which doesn't mean that we're going to be moving. We're moving together because you and I are there, but not moving in the same way.
Mhm. How many times has the story been told where people who co-haggle in their lives, one kills the other?
People who do what in their lives?
Co-haggle. It's an expression from Keithburg. Kills or what are the other options? Leaves behind, or it dies, or it can no longer be with that person, or whatever. That is awful. It's like, one needs this. One needs resistance. Families are based on resistance. I'm not going to hang up the goddamn tower. Who knows why? Have you brushed your teeth? It's like that. Have you combed your hair? You didn't comb your hair. Every morning, getting ready to, kids going to school.
But it doesn't matter what you say. I never said those things. I mean, my girls always, I don't think it has bothered them, but they always talk about the days, the years they lived with their hair uncombed, because I never combed it or asked them to comb it or anything. But then they still get back at things that I said that I thought, finally I was getting out of the, the nagging of the repetition. So, you never win.
No,
But in winning you would lose. I mean, in not having that resistance.
It's the perpetual sustaining of the game itself.
Yeah, but it's part of exactly. It's part of the game, and it cannot be taken out. Sometimes you think you're changing the game by not saying certain things, and the things that you're not saying are the ones that they don't care about, and the ones that you're saying you think are neutral. There's nothing neutral, but then it's always this game of no criteria.
I have a question about this. So I keep bringing up the creativity and the psychological ramifications of this, and I just wanted to know where this may come into play. There's a creativity theorist, Sarnath Metnick. I'm sure you've heard of him. I'm going to read something first before I propose my question. But basically,
could you close that door, please? There's a lot of noise coming in.
Basically, it's a question of the idea. He proposed an influential associative theory of the creative process. This theory is based on the premise that creativity requires the ability to make remote associations between separate ideas. Highly creative individuals were said to have a flat hierarchy of associations in comparison with a steep hierarchy of associations of those deemed less creative. So basically, excessively creative people have intense associations. So they may say cat and blue, but they don't know how they got from cat to blue. They do intuitively, but they can't in language bring it out. And in terms of, and so I'll keep reading. So figure, it says that this figure shows a flat associative hierarchy means that for any given stimulus, the creative person has many great associations available with roughly equal probabilities of retrieval. Because such an individual can generate many associative variations, the odds are increased that he will find one association that will make the necessary remote connection. Then he goes on and gives like a chart and everything. So he says the first word might quickly elicit such associates as shoe, hand, toe, and leg, while the second word might rapidly evoke such associates as order, army, obey an officer. The individual would then fall silent, waiting for the next verbal stimulus. And he goes on to say in the second, so basically, okay, so my question is, I mean, there's a whole analysis on from the psychological ramifications.
And who is this that you were?
Mednick's his theory of remote associations, and I know I have an issue myself personally where I make a lot of linkages, but I'm unable to articulate because it's so excessive in my head, and so you were talking about earlier about rhetoric and the stake that you have. What's the stakes of talking? And it's so overwhelming that you can't bring it into converge, and it's called divergent thinking. That's another form of creative thinking. So my question is, where does rhetorics, to what extent are the psychological ramifications taken into effect with regard to these linkages and genres, and to what extent is the idea of genres and categories a way of sort of protecting ourselves from the excessiveness of polymorphism?
It's called rhetorical invention. Okay, it's one of the so-called 5 sections of which the
Canons?
the Romans refer to as canon.
Rhetorical invention?
There are 3. Philip Polya, 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 How to Solve Problems. They're mathematical problems. And he talks about two approaches. One is an algorithmic approach, right? One is a heuristic approach. But then, there are other people then who add aleatory procedures. Those are the 3 ways of guessing effectively at when you look at a problem. A lot of people tend to think descriptively, therefore they use algorithmic solutions to problems that are not algorithmic problems, that have one right answer. One right answer. An algorithm solves a problem that is well defined, and it has one answer and only one answer. Anything else would violate those systems. But some problems are not well defined. They're dealing with ethics and so on. These are rhetorical problems. And there are many ways of coming up with reasonable answers. Okay, now when we talk about that, those are heuristic problems. Okay. Now those are what are closer to prescriptions, not descriptions. Descriptions are going to be more algorithmic. Okay. And then the third one is the throw of the dice, the coup de day. There are all kinds of ways that all kinds of things out there that you can use to shake loose in your mind, chance encounters.
So is rhetoric in some ways, I guess, healing process for, not healing, but...
Well, what it could be, I mean, there's something called Rogerian rhetoric. Carl Rogers.
And you could kind of read Burke like that too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when he talks about rhetoric as being compensatory to division.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
there's this passage where, he has is a quote to the beginning of the motto for the grammar of motives, okay, which gets translated as the purification of war. The problem is that the Latin quote can be interpreted in so many different ways, and has been, which really makes it problematic. Okay. The purification of war. How does one, and it's almost referred to here on page 151, waging war in the border zones. Okay. Doesn't mean they're trying to kill each other, but they're trying together or not together. Mostly not together. Musicians, for example, Schoenberg, doing something so different. How does he change? They've never been that before. Okay, one claim. rhetoric is concerned with in relation to the three speech items is deliberative discourse, deliberating over the future, okay, and judicial forensic over the past. And as I said, the third one, which seems to be not as logically attached, but it's there because it's dealing with death, but it's dealing with the present. It's epidictic discourse, okay, and praise and blame. But in great part, how does one talk about how do you bury somebody? How do you talk about the good death? Tell me, after Auschwitz, how do you talk about the good death? I mean, when we talk about soldiers dying and they're buried, they'll get a good burial. You know, as Eisenhower told before the landing on the continent, he spoke to hundreds of men, and he said, all that we can promise you is a good burial. I mean, they all knew they were going to give their lives. Okay? I mean, they didn't know what to expect. They were very young, it was all model, they were going to hit the beaches and so on. How does one talk about the good death in relation to Auschwitz? Give special status, okay? And talk about the 5 or 7 million dead Jews. Okay? What good comes from that? Are you going to argue, well, you know, they got their promised land again. Oh, God, you don't want to. No. There's no price you put on that. If, in fact, it is their promised land in the books. And there seems to be, it depends whom you're listening to, across Abrahamic families, okay, agreement that belongs to the Jews. That part of the family. But you know, I don't know. I don't know this. I'm not a Jew. I'm not any in those three. I don't even want to consider myself a Christian in that debate. But how do you have the good death? What happens to epidictic discourse at that point in time? That's a problem. It grabs you like this, you know. So this is what rhetoric does. It's problem solving. But it's more than that. Okay, by far more than that. It's in search of solutions to problems that have yet to be known as problems. And you can reverse the whole damn thing. Okay? Aleatory approach. Let's look at something as not a problem, but as a solution to a problem that may be all around us, but we don't see it. Or it may come later. You know, it's like when we sent the first human beings to the moon, there was all this data coming back, you know, for the engineers, but also for the scientists. And one person said, I remember this was on TV, and he was being interviewed. He was very much involved. And he said, you know, we're getting data which will be solutions to problems we don't even know we have.
One of the creativity theorists, I have to go back to my paper, mental block, he said the creative individual is not the one that can solve the problem, but the one that actually creates the problem.
Yeah.
Because you're creating.
Yes, there's that too. It's just turning things, it's just, picking up the stick from the other end, or in the middle, or whatever, just doing the thing that a kid might do. I mean, you're not going to buy your kid, we're going to take a break, you're not going to buy your kids any guns, right? Well, you'll pick up anything and it becomes a gun, Resourceful, kids are resourceful. Just take a break,
We
please.
did when I was a kid.
Victor, before we start, I've got two things that I want to
Sure,
ask.
please.
So in somewhere in here, which I haven't been able to find yet, he talks about addresser, addressee, referent, and sense. And the triangulation of addresser, addressee, and referent makes sense. But how, I guess, where does that come from to include sense in that group?
Oh, the word sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and where does he place it in there? In the triangle?
Yeah.
Where does he place it?
Well, I don't.
Oh, okay, all right.
No, that's my question.
from the code in the middle.
Right.
It would come from there. You would have the meanings, okay, the sense of things. Sense is a very, in French, sens, S-E-N-S, can be translated as sense, or meaning, or direction. I'm sorry?
I think we're just amazed about the range.
Well, there are just a few things I know, so. And I'm not a translator by any means. They would be part of the codes. Okay? They would be the availability of what the meanings are. In terms of, let's say, the vocabulary or vocabularies. But the extra here is we're creating new vocabularies by necessity. Because what a different would be begging for is a new word, a new vocabulary, a new phrase, a way to read everything. So when someone like Bart, God, please, my sinuses. And I talked about, and so just to refresh our memory, in the third sense, which is really, it's translated as the third meaning, okay, but it should be the third sense. There is the informational meaning, there is the symbolic meaning, and there is a third meaning, okay, which is the, what is it called? Obtuse, as in an obtuse angle.
Oh.
And it does not give you the meaning that you would want immediately, but it allows for the condition for the possibility of meanings, okay, that are coming. So you can see, you can easily link. I mean, we can say that Bart and Lyotard and others, we can find bridges here and link them all together, are attempting to discover new languages, okay? Ways of resolving difference.
Nick, in the back, there's a glossary of French terms, and it says pages 105 to 16. Just 116 is sense, but I don't know which passage you're looking for.
Thank you.
Wait, did you mean paragraph 24, where the four instances that constitute a phrase universe, the addressee,
Yes.
the
Yes.
referent,
That's
the
right.
sense, the addressor? It's on page 13.
But to be more direct, where is it? Nothing. And nothing. And one pulls it from nothing. Here it is up there. Nothing. It's everything. It's remember, I tried to talk about nothing as everything that has been thrown out, thrown away. It's thrown away. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Throw it away, right? And it becomes nothing, and it's going to come back. It has to come back. There will be a time when you can use it. It has use value. I'm saying that with a smile on my face. Use value. There's something also called useless value.